Hello, everybody, and welcome to the week that really was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan. It is the week ending the 21st of June, 2024. Some of you will have been expecting to be seeing our wonderfully handsome, in my case, at least, faces um, this week, but we're not going to be able to do that just yet because my technicians tell me we need to use a different program than the one we currently use to record this podcast if we want to use video. And besides the point, I'm going to be away overseas, still doing the podcast, but away overseas for the next 2 weeks. So probably wouldn't be able to do video at that point anyway. So that will be coming. We're definitely going to do it, but probably towards the end of July, just as a housekeeping. But before we get into today's topics, let's say hello to my co-host. How are you, sir?
I'm grand, yeah. Turns out turning the podcast into video is more work than we thought it was. So, I can
Yes.
continue my secret, no one will ever know. Do I have pseudo cream all over my face? You'll never know for another couple of weeks.
Yes, we find out. We'll find out. It'll be the big reveal, face reveal. Also, I'm kind of concerned because the pictures that we use on the kind of like the tiles for the podcast, I mean, those are quite old now at this stage, at
I
least
know,
in
I
my
hate that
case.
picture of myself. So that's fine by me.
Didn't you use it as an election poster or something
I
like that?
know. And I hated it.
It mustn't be
Um,
that mustn't be that good because no one voted for you.
yeah, exactly. I should have definitely used a better photo. It would have changed the entire outcome of the election. Um, but yeah, no, I do not like that picture.
Oh well. Well, soon in a couple of weeks, the internet will be full of pictures of you, but you're guaranteed to look fairly good because you'll be beside my big mug, so that will help. Let's stop talking about ourselves and start talking about things that happened this week. And the one that jumps out at me happened today, Thursday. We record this, as people will know, on a Thursday evening, and it is this case. We're going to call it the Crotty case in Limerick, where a soldier, serving soldier, battered a woman half to death. Pope bragged about it on the internet, denied it. Then CCTV caught him in the act, and then he pled guilty. And the judge said, "You know what? He'd lose his job in the army if I sent you to prison, so you're getting a suspended sentence." What did you make of it?
Lose his job in the army. Is that not just, that's like something from a movie? I mean, he beat a woman very, very violently. And, for context, in the street, because herself and her friends were asking him and his friends to stop drunkenly shouting words on the road. I mean, it was completely unprovoked. They didn't know each other. This is obviously an extremely violent incident that's had a profound impact on that poor woman and will for a long time. And she suffered like very bad facial injuries and a lot of trauma, I'd imagine. Or not, I'd imagine, she said in her victim impact statement. The fact that he gets a suspended sentence is nothing short of bewildering. I mean, what do you have to do to get a sentence?
I mean,
Does she have to die?
this all for me, and it's a fair question because I mean, he is only very lucky that she didn't die. I
She
mean,
could have
when
easily, he's banging her head off the ground. She could have easily gotten a brain bleed or something and died.
well, people have. I mean, it is a fact of life. Is a fact. It's a simple statement of fact without naming any specific cases, but I'm thinking of one in particular.
Hmm.
Um, that there are people in Irish prisons who have killed people, in similar circumstances,
Yeah,
often with less violence.
yeah.
And they it's mostly convicted of manslaughter because they didn't intend to kill them. They maybe punched them in the face. The person went down, hit their head off the road, and died, and they're in prison because. And they use less violence than this guy did. This guy grabbed her by the hair. He posted on social media, proud of himself. I think the phrase was something like "two to put her down, two to knock her out." He
Like,
was proud of
also,
himself
he's
for it.
texting that to his friends. Who are these people? I mean, I admit, I really don't think I'm naive when I say that 99%, 0.9% of men I've ever met, even if they received that message, would be like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah, I was saying to you before we came on air, and I don't want to. I certainly don't want to kind of canonize myself because I think this is sort of a basic thing. I think a lot of men listening will relate to me. But like, is there not a taboo against hitting women? Like, where'd that go? I mean, be fair enough. Somebody's coming at you with a knife, and your gender goes out the window at that stage. But I would have thought slash hoped that there would be, most of us would still realize, look, you're physically stronger. You don't use violence against women or indeed
Yeah.
children. or indeed children. You know, people who are people who can't match you physically,
Or animals, hopefully. Yeah.
or animals, dogs or cats. I mean, it's basic decency. Anyway, you know, apparently not. But this is the thing, Sarah. Prison is supposed to protect the rest of us. That's the
Yeah.
point of prison. That's why it was invented. You take people who are dangerous to the rest of society and you put them somewhere where they're no longer dangerous. In the olden days before prisons, we would have hung them. Or, you know, the Brits at some point sent them to Australia. The Romans fed them to the lions. It is to take them out of society and make sure they're no longer dangerous to the rest of us. Um, and this guy, and I don't care. I mean, look, if he wants to sue me for defamation, he can sue me for defamation. But if you are a guy who goes around punching women, in those circumstances, that is not a random thing that you only ever done once. You've got violence in you. You're a danger to the rest of society. I mean, what happens the next time he drinks and he forgets about his little court experience and he meets some other unfortunate woman or, God forbid, child or something on the street? Is
Yeah,
the
I mean, to
justice
your
system there
point,
not to protect us?
100%. But it's also about, well, there's multiple things the prison system is there. It's there as a deterrent. It's there as a punishment. It's there to protect us. I mean, if he doesn't go, he's not deterred. He's laughing about it to his friends after he's happened. He obviously went to court subsequent to that. But I think that he he's I don't understand. I don't see anything. I mean, back to your point that you said, there's these one punch killers exist, fine, okay. And they punched somebody who fell over, hit their head, and then, the person died. And obviously that is a violent act, but, it's not quite the same thing. This is a guy who, to me, seems very strongly capable of, capable of unleashing such violence against a woman for so little reason that I don't really see what's happened in the interim that's stopping him from doing that again when he's had 10 points or whatever.
I mean,
so I don't know. I mean, again, what does it who does go to prison if not him?
Well, I think apart from the justice system having questions to answer, and I'll come back to that in a second, the other organization with real questions to answer here, I think, is the army. Because the army the army sends an officer who I won't name, but you can find his name if you want, to the trial and to give evidence. And obviously it goes without saying that, if you're called to stand, you have to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I get that. But for an army officer in these circumstances, representing the Irish Armed Forces, to go into a trial in these situations and take the stand to say that the guy was an exemplary, professional, and disciplined officer in the army. I mean, to use a word like exemplary, that's a strange thing. I think that's a strange thing for the army to have done. I mean, and then, I think the army really has a test of its own character here as well, because, the judge's rationale for not sending him to prison was so that he'd keep his job in the armed forces. I mean, as an Irish person, I mean, do we want somebody who's capable of that in our armed forces representing us abroad if they're sent on peacekeeping missions to areas where there are vulnerable people, and you can, there's less scrutiny on you? I mean, I think the army has questions to answer about its conduct here, to be honest.
I mean, I think that, there's no question but that this incident happened. So how somebody can stand up as exemplary, use the word exemplary, or speak to his character is baffling for starters, because he's demonstrated his character. He has set upon somebody physically weaker than him and punched the head off her. So that's his character. That's who he is. That's what he did.
And there was no doubt. There was no doubt about this. This wasn't character evidence. Like, while there was a doubt about his guilt, he pleaded guilty. He admitted doing this, and you've got army officers in there saying he's an exemplary officer. I think they're. I mean,
but it doesn't. You can't hold the two things in your hand at the same time. Like, if there's a trial going on for Ted Bundy, nobody who used to work with him at the local, cash and carry comes in and goes, "He was a great guy to work with." Who cares? Who cares what he was like at work?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's that got to do with anything? So he's great at work. He's also sober at work. This is who he is when he's drunk. And now he just walks out and it's like he needs his job. I mean, what position is he going to be in the army that somebody could trust him not to only act like that on somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you would think there's a lot of characteristics in a soldier that are missing there. I mean, you need somebody who's calm in high stress situations. I mean, this guy.
Yeah.
Look, that's for the army to sort out, and we'll keep an eye on it. But then you have the other spectacle today, which is on the same day. Fine Gael, who having good local elections and kind of snapped their political gear into game, they kind of regressed a bit today because on the same day this was happening, Fine Gael decided to put out a strong message that they are, and I quote, the party of law and order. And the reason they're the party of law and order, Sarah, is that they are increasing the maximum sentence for knife crime from 5 years to 7. Which seems to me be a little bit irrelevant when judges aren't even giving the minimum sentences. Well, they are giving the minimum sentences, but not much more, as we've just seen in this case. Like this kind of was the dog that didn't bark in the local and European elections, but it's surely got to be an issue in the general election when you've got cases like this. And some political party surely is going to have the gumption to really challenge them on sort of sentencing. You'd think moving forward.
I mean, we say that, and I've been waiting for that for a long time, but you never really see it. There's a lot of posturing, and there's a lot of this, and there's a lot of that, but ultimately, I mean, Fine Gael tweeting today that they're the party of law and order is about as laughable as somebody speaking on behalf of this guy in court and saying he's of good character. The two things are completely irrelevant. Nobody believes that Fine Gael is the party of law and order anymore. And I don't think anybody's believed that in a while. But I will say it's an obvious, part of a strategy by their new leader, and fine, politicians be politicking to try and claw back some of that Fine Gael voter that's lost him, that cares about law and order, and that's his job, and that's what he's doing. But I don't think most people believe it, and the timing was poor.
Yeah, well, a tweet won't kill them, of course, but I just think it is just. I think this case will resonate with people. I think it will resonate for a couple of reasons. First of all, because the victim is speaking out, and we should name her because she's been brave enough to speak out. Her name is Miss Miss Natasha O'Brien. I didn't want to get that wrong, so that's why I took a second just to double check it. But Natasha O'Brien, who has spoken out and is going on the record, and you'd find videos of her online talking about what happened to her. And I think it will resonate. I think. This is one I see it's already, despite having happened this evening, the second most read story on the Irish Times website, which is a good indicator often I find of a story kind of breaking through. And I think there are going to be political questions about this one moving forward, and it's going to be one to watch.
Yeah, and I think that people really, this is completely unprovoked, completely random attack happening on the street. She could be anybody's daughter, and people obviously, as a society, we get pretty annoyed about innocent victims being violently attacked in that way, and ultimately there being no consequence. A suspended sentence. I mean, the guy should be in prison for a few years.
The other thing is, do you not think there's a double standard for Irish people and others? And I mean, by that I mean, we had the incident in Temple Bar with the American chap who was very seriously injured. Mm-hmm. And that, of course, was international news, and that cast the country in a bad light. So we had to be really tough there. I mean, if Natasha O'Brien had been an American tourist who this had happened to, do we think the guy would have gotten a suspended sentence? Because I don't.
Well, that's depressing.
I'm not saying anything that other than what I think. I think that had this story been one of those where the country might be cast in a bad light by this kind of violence on the street, I think an example might have been made. But because she was a native person and the story is confined to our shores, there's no international PR damage. I think that I don't think justice is blind. And I think the reason justice isn't blind is because of the lack of prison spaces and judges consciously deciding to keep the prisons as empty as possible because no one's built a prison in this country for 30 years.
I think though, if I was in government, particularly Fine Gael, and claiming to be the law and order party, and you've kind of just had good local and European elections, I think that I think we don't really fully know yet what the parameters of this general election will be. So in the past, let's just pretend for a second that there's going to be a general election in November, and in the past, general elections, the narrative or what the general election is fought on, the issue, sometimes it could be something that we haven't even thought of now, if you know what I mean. And I think that, immigration and some of the obvious things will feature, but it's very possible that whatever the main issue of that election is fought on hasn't emerged yet. And I think it's very possible that it ends up being law and order. And I think that some big story like this or something happens, and it could turn really badly for Fine Gael. I think if I was strategizing for Fine Gael, I'd be quite concerned about that concept.
Yeah. I mean, no one thought in the last election that it was going to be about commemorating the RIC was going to be
Hmm.
the issue that dominated the first couple of weeks of the election campaign, and then of course COVID. So yeah, I mean, you just don't know what it could end up being. Anyway, let's move on. Talk about some other things. Sort of a big week this week politically, in that there were two press conferences, and we'll talk about them both. Micheál Martin held one, but first Eamon Ryan held one, and Eamon's was a little bit more significant in that he announced he was standing down as the leader of the Green Party. And I got in trouble. I got in trouble with my readers a lot this week. Me and the readers are having arguments, but one of the reasons I got in trouble, I'll come to the others later on, was that I said Eamon Ryan has been one of the most effective politicians of his generation, which some people mistook for an endorsement of Eamon Ryan, which it wasn't. But
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you look at this guy and you look at the Greens have, I think, 12 seats in the Dáil at the moment, which is the most they've ever had. But even at that, it's like a third of the number of Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. And despite that, they have enacted more of their agenda, mainly because they're the only ones to have an agenda, than either of the two big government parties. And Eamon Ryan, over a relatively short period of time in cabinet, I mean, 4 years, 5 years on this spell, and maybe 5 years before, 10 years in office, has probably done more in his 10 years in office to change the country than any other single member of the cabinet that we've had since maybe Sean Lemass. Is that an exaggeration?
No, and in the vision of his own ideology. I mean, it's that, like, you're right. It doesn't, I'm not a Green voter. I'm not a fan of the Green Party by any stretch of the imagination, but you couldn't, it'd be the equivalent of a conservative, very conservative politician getting elected in Ireland, or, and enacting loads of changes to abortion laws and different things in their own. You couldn't but argue that they'd fulfilled some of their ambitions for their political career. And by that metric, you couldn't but say he's been successful as a politician.
Yeah, I mean, I
Doesn't
look at
mean
him.
you have to like him.
Yeah, I look at him and I think Eamon Ryan has, he has a couple of things. He's always had a couple of things going for him. Number one, persistently underrated throughout his career because he had a habit of kind of being a comical character. Like I still think the funniest speech in the Dáil in my lifetime was the one during COVID-19 when he was still in opposition, where he was arguing that everyone should get watercress seeds. Do you remember this? And he stood up in the Dáil and he said, look, and while we're at home, we can grow watercress on our back windows. And if there's a famine, if there's no food, well, we'll have our salads ready to go. Do you remember that?
Yes, of course I remember it.
That was
It's
his
brilliant.
delivery. People should look it up on YouTube if they haven't seen it. And everyone laughed at him. And I laughed at him. And I mean, and then there was the footage of him asleep. And then there was the footage of him dancing barefoot down the street at Pride. And he always came across as kind of an amiable, kind of harmless idiot. And I think he played that brilliantly. It reminds me a little bit of the Emperor Claudius in ancient Rome, who everyone thought was a half-wit and then ended up being a very good emperor. Um, he always kind of played the fool a little bit, or maybe that was just a personality. But behind there was a really canny politician who knew when to make a deal. Has never really threatened the stability of any government he's been in. Has forced his party to take the hard votes to bail out his coalition partners every now and again, but in return extracted a king's ransom in terms of his agenda. I mean, everything from bottle recycling to home insulation to jacking up the carbon taxes to basically everything you don't like has been his
Yeah,
agenda.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's no denying it. He's been a success. Do you think that he left of his own volition, or do you think that he sat him down and said these elections were crap and you need to go?
Well, if it was the latter, they're idiots. Like I have to assume it's of his own volition, because if they voluntarily are getting rid of him, I think they're very, very foolish. Because I know on the right side of politics, there's a tendency to get annoyed at the sense that the Greens didn't have a disastrous election, and they lost half their seats, they lost both their MEPs, but they weren't wiped out, and they're on course to retain. Like when the Greens were last in government, the first time they were in government, when John Gormley was the leader and Trevor Sargent, if you remember, resigned because he didn't want to go into that government, and John Gormley became the leader. And at the end of that period in government, they were literally wiped off the map. There were no green TDs left. That won't happen this time. They're going to hold 5 or 6 seats. on based on the votes they got in the local and European elections, and that's a success for them after 5 years in government. So if they tossed him out or tried to push him out, they're very foolish because, I think their fortunes might change substantially for the worse under Minister Roderick O'Gorman if he becomes the leader.
Oh, imagine.
This is the thing I would say. The other thing I'd say is if you are somebody who's anti-green and you're never going to vote for them, I still don't think you dislike Eamon Ryan particularly. I think you probably wouldn't vote for him, think he's a bit of an idiot. Whereas Roderick O'Gorman inspires a kind of opposition that Eamon Ryan never did. And I also don't think he's half as good a communicator. I don't think he's half as smart, and I think he will be a disaster for them if he's the leader.
Totally agree. I think Eamon Ryan is actually, I've never met Roderick, so I don't know, but I have met Eamon Ryan. He's a very nice man.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I mean, I think I'm quite sore about, just the small matter of being gaslit and lied to for those two referendums by Rodgers.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that he could just kind of suddenly just waltz into Leinster House and become the leader of the Greens after that performance is mystifying. And I think that there is a lot of people who feel that way. They weren't Green voters anyway, but I think he inspires a lot of disdain, we'll say. And there's other problems with some of his performance over the last couple of years as well. But I think parties sometimes make mistakes. Like, I think it was a huge mistake, and I've said it loads of times on the podcast, for Labour to get rid of Alan Kelly. But they did. The of crowds isn't always there.
Yes. And of course, the other thing is with politics, the longer you're in office, the more people in your own party want rid of you because you're blocking their career paths. So I'm sure there will be some people in the Greens who'd be glad to see the back of him. I think it'd be really interesting actually to watch his own constituency because he's not running in the election, and there'll be a really interesting fight there because there are two councillors, two female councillors, both of them very liberal, but both of them very different wings of the Greens. So you've got Councillor Claire Byrne, who got the nomination in the by-election, who's always been seen, I stress the word seen, as being much more in tune with Eamon Ryan. And part of his team. And then you've obviously got the former Lord Mayor and newly re-elected councillor Hazel Chew in the Pembroke ward in that constituency, who has always been seen as being on the more radical wing of the Green Party than Eamon Ryan. I think only one of them get the nomination. They're not going to run two candidates, and I think that could be a bloodbath of an internal fight. Not that we'll necessarily hear a lot about it, but it'll be interesting to watch which of those two emerges with the nomination to fight that constituency. The other thing is really good news for Ivana Bacik. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's not bad news. That's for sure. I still don't think Ivana Bacik is going to make it anyway. I'm afraid. I think that constituency will be.
There's some whispers on the wind that Michael McDowell might contest that constituency.
Yeah.
Do you think he would win a seat if he did? I think he would.
I think that here I'm gonna do another one of my predictions.
Okay.
I think in a general election, that constituency, those 4 seats will be one Sinn Féin, one Michael McDowell, one Fine Gael, and probably one Fianna Fáil fighting out with the Green for the last seat.
Okay. Poor Ivana. Oh well. We'll have to see.
Oh, Ivana, we hardly knew you.
Although I wouldn't be as confident as you are that your old friend Chris Andrews will hold his seat if the Sinn Féin vote doesn't emerge with a strong resurgence. I wouldn't be as confident as you are.
He like the Sinn Féin vote held up quite well in the southeast inner city. He got a councillor elected there, and that's where he's predominantly based. And like some constituencies celebrate mediocrity, so they'll probably get elected.
Yeah, but anyway, so Eamon Ryan is gone. I have to say, I think the other thing about his standing down is that his reasons were very human. He said that he's obviously got a family who put up with a lot for him to do the job he's doing. He's got a son, I think, with special needs, and he says he wants to spend more time with them. Well, he's in the prime of his life, and I think a lot of people will be able to relate to that, even if they like you and me don't agree with him at all. Anyway, so Eamon held his press conference, announced his resignation on, I think, Tuesday. And then Micheál Martin, not to be outdone, announced that he was holding a press conference of his very own at 5:30 on the Wednesday. of this week, and there was a rumble of excitement.
There
Could
was
this
about
be?
25 minutes of super excitement, wasn't there?
Yes, there was. Could Micheál Martin be finally ending his reign of mediocrity at the top of Fianna Fáil? But no, no, he will have to be. He will have to be. He will. He would leave that job either by being forced out, or if he's never forced out, he will leave it in a box. Um,
Yeah.
and his announcement was that he was appointing a new deputy leader of Fianna Fáil, one Jack Chambers, who is junior minister for something or other. Is he still the chief whip? I don't even know.
Yeah, I
Um,
think so.
and I mean, bizarre, just
I mean,
bizarre.
in one way, I was like, is Micheál just jelly because everyone else has been getting so much attention for the last week that he just decides to do something um, to get himself press? I want a press conference. Everyone else has had a press conference this week. I want a press conference. Um, and the fact that it wasn't immediately announced what it was about seemed like a deliberate attempt to kind of whip up something. I don't know. Um, I mean, I don't think anybody really believed by any stretch of the imagination, Micheál, who's basically the Charlton Heston of Fianna Fáil, and that you'll have to take the leadership from his cold, dead hand, was actually going to come out and say, "Yeah, no, I've had enough of this. I'm going to go." But I think that it was a bit of a damp squib then, and it looked a bit silly. I mean, I don't really know Jack Chambers that well, and like I haven't paid that much attention to his performance in his as chief whip. But Paul has not had a deputy leader for Fianna Fáil since, is it since O'Keefe?
Well, there was Eamon
Oh,
O'Keefe, there was
no, then it was
Darach
Gareth
Leary.
Leary. Yeah, yeah. So this just seemed odd. It felt odd to me, and I think a lot of people were kind of a bit perplexed by I mean, do you normally announce the deputy leader with a press conference like that?
No, it was all a little bit odd and a little bit desperate. It wasn't the only odd thing Micheál Martin did this week, because he also gave a speech in the Dáil on the EU migration treaty. And in that speech, he basically said that you know Ireland was always a multicultural country, and that the people who fought for and founded our state saw it as a place with multiple identities open to the world and embodying the most important Republican principle of all, to reflect the diversity of its people. I mean, whatever about that being an important Republican principle and reflecting the diversity of his people, I am not convinced, Sarah, that Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith and the lads were in the GPO fighting for diversity. I would have thought that they were probably more fighting for the idea of a homeland, an independent one for the Irish people as a distinct group, rather than a country open to the world. And it got a lot of attention, that speech, online. I mean, 322,000 views, and a classic sort of social media ratio where there are like 1,500 replies to only 500 likes. What did you make of it?
I mean, I make of it. Like, I hate this retrospective thing of applying modern thinking and modern themes onto the past in order, I don't think they were thinking about diversity either. And that's fine. Everything doesn't have to be, it's like when some scholar will come out and say, oh, this person was actually trans in 1857. Well, you know what? They probably weren't. And who cares? You don't need this kind of like to whitewash history or write history to make people, seem better or whatever. It just is what it is. And it's a story in and of itself. And we didn't have a lot of multiculturalism in Ireland at that time. And that's fine.
It reminds me, the Daily Telegraph ran a story this week that Stephen Fry, the celebrated actor, had said that, in the future we might have a gay king, and won't that be great? And I was thinking, I mean, okay, fine. Might be a while, but okay, fine. But like James the First was a screaming homosexual in the 1600s and nobody cared. So I mean, you're right. That business of the past must conform, or everything must conform to our values. I mean, I got in trouble this week at the start of the week.
You got in trouble a few times this week, John.
Yeah, I got in trouble because I wrote a piece basically saying, which most of the people, I'm convinced most of the people who attacked me for the piece didn't read it. Because what I said was that hardline ethno-nationalism is a political and a cultural dead end. And stress the word hardline. And what I said was, most people, I think, instinctively recognize that Ireland is essentially a country for Irish people. That's why it exists. We didn't invent a country, to share with the Japanese. This is our country. It's mainly for Irish people, and that most people think, to some degree, in ethno-nationalist terms. Most people think of Irish people as being, having names like Murphy and Duffy and Smith, and going around the world and looking a certain way. And we're really proud of our ethnic descendants overseas. We're really proud when some lad with an Irish granny plays in the Super Bowl, or when John
Yeah.
F. Kennedy becomes the U.S. president.
Yeah.
So there's an ethno-nationalist streak in everybody. That's what I was saying. But where that becomes a political and cultural dead end is when it becomes the only frame you use for nationhood, where you basically say that well, nobody else can be Irish. And I was writing about the case of that runner, Rashida Adeleke, who represented Ireland on the international stage and won, I think, a silver medal at the European Championships. And there was promptly a couple of days of coverage about the abuse she got. And she definitely did get abuse, of people saying, oh, she's not really Irish, even though she was born in Tala, raised in Tala, speaks with an Irish accent, has known no other country of her birth. And people saying, oh, well, she can't be Irish. And I'm saying that kind of ethno-nationalism is a complete political and cultural dead end. Because, I mean, you're not going to win that argument with the electorate. The electorate is not going to turn around against a successful athlete who speaks like them and is proud to represent them and go, well, actually, you're not one of us. It's just not going to happen. And most people don't think like that. So you have to, I mean, Marine Le Pen, who's supposedly the most far right, politician in all of Europe, doesn't think like that. She supports the idea that you can be assimilated into citizenship, and that the test for citizenship should be your loyalty to France and your willingness to make a contribution to France. And I think that's what most people think as well. They recognize that Ireland should be a majority Irish state, certainly. But this business of, people who don't look like us can't be one of us, that's what I'm saying is a dead end. Not the idea that, our genetic heritage or our racial heritage has no component to Irishness, but that it's not the only one. But yeah, some people apparently thought that's what I was saying, or else willfully misrepresented it, or else, frankly, are so far gone that they genuinely do think that you have to have particular genes to be Irish, in which case, it's a pretty bleak vista, I think.
And so what, you got comments from people giving out to you?
Oh yeah, I got a lot of, my Twitter replies have been full all week of people discussing, genetics. And apparently there was one guy did a video. Apparently there's some guy found in a bog 3,000 years ago, and his DNA shows that he was able to drink milk like most Irish people today. So we're the same race going back 3,000 years, and apparently it can be proven by genetics, to which I say, who cares?
Yeah.
Who actually cares? I mean, what is the significance of that? If you're saying that only people with certain genes can be Irish, then that's a very dark road to go down. It's a very dark road for any nation to go down, as history has proven us. But what makes a nation, I would argue, is the language, the character, the culture, your loyalty to it, and what you contribute to it. And if people are willing to contribute and be part of our team, a smart country embraces them. But that doesn't mean that you let the world and its mother in, or engage in open borders, which I think is what people misrepresented me as saying. But yeah, Micheál Martin then was kind of going a bit further and saying that our entire Republican values are based on having open borders and diversity, which is equally a nonsense, I'd argue.
Yeah, there's a lot of nonsense on both sides, though. This is the problem. And there's pretending, there's kind of false equivalences, and then there's pretending that, if you're a person who's concerned about, and I saw today an article about how there's a lot of tents back now down and around Pearse Street, I think. And if you're a person who lives around there who's concerned about that, being told that, oh, the next time you go to hospital, like, I hope you're going to refuse treatment from somebody who works in the hospital who comes from another country. But like, that's not what that person is concerned about. Like, you're allowed to ask a question about tents and not be like sanctimoniously lectured to about the amount of immigrants in Ireland who work in the health service and service industry and all those things. I mean, anyone with half a brain can understand that, people from other countries prop up a huge amount of our entire economy, and we're very happy to have them. And that's a wonderful thing. But this kind of there's just a lot of nonsense on both sides. Like it's if you ask a question about immigration and economic migration and how we process people and how we deal with that, and then you're just kind of gaslit about healthcare workers. It's like that's not what you're asking about.
There was a story this week in one of the newspapers about a Syrian refugee who had come to Ireland in 2014 as a child, or maybe in her early teenage years. But 10 years later, now into 2024, she has qualified as a doctor, and she's going to go start training in our hospitals. And fair play to her, more power to her. But I had to ask myself, why is this being broadcast everywhere? Woman qualifies, becomes doctor. I mean, and there's this constant narrative of we must only tell the positive stories. And we must not tell the negative stories because they're there as well. There are positive stories and there are negative stories because migrants, like anybody else, are not a homogenous group. There will always be people who are really successful, but there will also always be people who come here and engage in a life of crime, for example.
Yeah.
There will be people who refuse to integrate. There will be people drawn to extremism. There will be people who never adapt to the sort of sexual values of a Western society and continue to embrace the sexual values of the country that they came from, with negative consequences for women and children. That is the global experience of migration. But the only story that you're allowed to tell is the really positive one. And that in turn, that kind of fanatical kind of pro-immigrant extremism, which is what it is, in turn feeds these people on the other side who think, if the media is going to be extremist, I'll be extremist too, and I'm going to say all darkies go home.
Yeah.
It's just all becoming depressingly toxic and stupid. Is the problem.
And the way that it's been managed, like this week, we had Michael O'Leary on the radio going through exactly what's been happening on their flights and proposals that they're putting vis-a-vis destroying or getting rid of passports, and then the proposals that they've made to the government to solve that. And I was kind of surprised that it even got the coverage, because I thought, well, for the most part, this kind of narrative has been just hidden away for the last year and a half. I mean, when working class people from North Inner City were marching about this, they were just called racist.
Yeah, and Michael O'Leary is able to say it. But in a way, I was kind of encouraged that Michael O'Leary was able to say it. I mean, there was no talk of cancelling him for saying it, which I think shows that the Overton window has moved and the sort of centre of gravity has moved. I mean, there are very few people in Ireland who will have disagreed with Michael O'Leary, except for one newly elected Labour councillor on Dublin City Council, who said that he shouldn't be platformed with his far right beliefs, which I thought was interesting because Michael O'Leary is far right.
I love the way that's where they go first always. Like, you shouldn't be platformed. You know what I mean? Like, not with the substance of what he's saying, just that he should be cancelled. They're so archaic and hurty words, and we shouldn't have to listen to people that we don't like or agree with. It's comedy to watch.
Yes, this is Kieran Ahern, by the way, the Labour Party councillor-elect for Rathfarnham, who I would have thought was kind of up until this sort of on the sensible wing of Labour, but he described,
such a thing.
Well, we were just singing Dermot Lacey's praises last week. We can't now pretend there isn't a sensible wing of Labour. There is a sensible wing of Labour. They're just in the distinct minority, and and it's become a smaller minority because Kieran Ahern has defected from the sensible wing to the screaming wing. And he was
Although the ratio, now that Aon's gone to Europe, the ratio of the same one's probably skyrocketed.
Yeah, maybe he's pitching for the Aon O'Riordan spot, but he was, because Ryanair have been running this campaign. Ryanair have been actually quite exercised about what's happening, sort of not only with immigration but in terms of the sort of Green Party's transport policies.
Yeah,
and they've been running this campaign called Flights Not Bikes, to try and get people to expand Dublin Airport and allow people to go on their holidays for cheaper and take advantage of the economic opportunities that would be. So they posted a tweet with some guy some girl actually in a dark skinned girl of all things in a Ryanair t-shirt outside government building holding up a Flights Not Bike sign. And this newly elected councillor, Kieran Ahern, he said it was unhinged. So Flights Not Bikes is unhinged, and he said, but let's platform their CEO and every broadcaster possible to spout his far right climate denier views. So that just says to me the far right's gone mainstream. Because if Michael O'Leary is far right, everybody's far right, or at least half the country's far right. Because I guarantee you half the country was nodding their heads to Michael O'Leary going, About time somebody said
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
So I mean, if Michael O'Leary is far right is now the thing to be for a lot of people, I think.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, let's see how that plays out. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right that most people who listened to what he was saying would probably be in agreement with a lot of it. I think less pearl clutching from Labour and more, debate about the substance of the issues might help.
hmm. Let's talk a little bit because we'll get in trouble if we don't talk a little bit about the Migration Pact debate in the Dáil. They've delayed the vote for a week.
Hmm.
Um, for reasons that, I mean, I think a lot of people are getting excited about the fact that it was delayed by a week, but I don't think it was
Yeah,
delayed because they couldn't get the votes. I think it was genuinely delayed because they got a bit of time on the schedule and there are a fair few people who want to speak on it and they're not in any particular rush to pass it. And I think it will pass at the end of next week. But yeah, they
yeah.
delayed it for a week anyway. But what do you
I agree.
make?
I think people will be
What do you make?
prematurely excited about it being delayed for a week, and I think that that was just a scheduling thing.
Yeah, what do you make of the whole debate around it? Because I think it's one of those ones. I keep. I mean, I really understand Michael McDowell's objection to it, which is that there's a transfer of sovereignty that is permanent and irrevocable.
Mhm.
Um, but like, is there not a case that actually the migration pact in the short to medium term, will probably help the government get a handle to some degree on migration?
That's possible, but you don't make changes to the Irish law that are with only the short to medium term in mind.
Yeah, but look, you and I think that, which is the reason we're doing a podcast, not sitting in the Dáil. Politicians think in the short term all the bloody time. That's the only way they think. You and I would say you don't make short term decisions; you make decisions for the good of the country. But I
Not
think,
short-term decisions that like impact our ability to control our own inward migration forever. Do you know? Like that's pretty serious. I mean, like I'm obviously with McDougall on this one, but I think that what we're seeing is a pre-election, I would say maybe slightly panicked decision to, something must be done, something must be done, something must be done. Here's something, we've done something. You know what I mean?
hmm,
And I think that that has long-term consequences. And it feels a little bit again like the referendum in the sense that it feels like something that the government haven't really thought through, haven't really read the fine print, and are just trying to ram through real quick. And people who are, like, say, McDougall is a real constitutional advocate. He's very passionate about the Constitution, about protecting it. He thinks what I think, which is that it's not a kind of a Word document that you copy and paste things in and out of at whatever's trend based on whatever's trendy at the time. And I think that he's right on this, and I think that it's short-sighted by the government. It's an attempt to be seen to do something, and I'm not sure there is evidence really to suggest that it's going to make any difference to the problems that we're having at the moment. Because I think that the most of the problems we're having at the moment are not, you know, are more to do with domestic capacity and our ability to enforce existing laws than they are about any wider picture.
well, my old boss Declan Ganley was on a news talk during the week debating this with Barry Ward, who converts to everything in the government. I mean, Barry is just an extraordinary in the way that he will debate everything with the zeal of a convert. But Declan was making the point that there's actually nothing in the migration pact that the government can't do of their own bat.
Yeah,
The only thing is information sharing with other European countries, which they should have been doing anyway before there was a pact.
yeah,
So there's an element to this as well, I think, where they want to kind of cover off their left flank by saying, oh, well, now we have to take these slightly tougher measures because we signed up to the EU Migration Pact, even though they could have taken them anyway. So
yeah.
I think there's a degree of like covering off their left flank by saying we'll sign up to this and then we'll make it look like we're being made do this stuff. Um, but I mean, I just find like there's these calls for a referendum on the pact, and I think Una McGurk, who's a very eminent barrister and a senior counsel, has gone to the High Court seeking an injunction. She's a very eminent barrister, but the courts are full of very eminent barristers. So I wouldn't think though that she'll be successful, because the truth is we had a referendum on this in the Lisbon Treaty in 2009, where we handed over competence in the area of migration to the European Union, and it's effectively like we gave them planning permission then, but they're only building the house now.
Mm.
Um, so I don't think there can be a referendum or anything like that. But I also wonder how this is being perceived out in the countryside, and I haven't seen any opinion polling on it at all. But I just think it's one of those ones where it'll actually be a couple of years before we find out if this was the right or the wrong decision.
Yeah, and the cynical part of me would say that a lot of these TDs know that they'll be gone by then. So, or they'll be in a longer term, and a lot of this issue may have resolved itself, or, there'll be a different issue that's the hot topic by then.
Mm.
So I don't know, but I mean, what I was about to say, I think immigration is a huge issue for voters, and all polls say it, but they didn't vote on it. So maybe it's not. I
Well,
mean, in
they
every poll coming up to those local and European elections, immigration was the number one issue.
Yeah, but immigration was kind of a big feature of the campaign for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, to be fair. I mean, and this is one thing. I mean, they did have to move rhetorically substantially right to head it off.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, Barry Cowan in his campaign. I know he wasn't in the constituency you were working in, but Barry Cowan was sending a tweet basically every other day of the week, going, control immigration. He looked like Donald Trump. Like Donald Trump will like occasionally send out a tweet just going, close the borders, and like 16 exclamation marks after it. Basically what Barry Cowan was doing. He was like almost sending out tweets going, close the borders, immigration must be
Yeah.
dealt with. So I mean, there was definitely and he got elected. And I mean, there's definitely some voters out there who were concerned of this issue and said, oh, well, Barry Cowan gets it, I'm voting for him. I mean, you and I mightn't understand those voters, but they're out there. So I don't think it's fair to say that the public didn't vote on it necessarily. I think the public concern definitely shifted the political center of gravity to the right on this issue. But I also don't, my prediction is that it won't be the biggest issue in the general election campaign because, like
Yeah.
you say, there will be other issues that come out there. There's health, there's the state of the health service, there's hospitals, there's childcare, there's the cost of living, and people ultimately, I think, vote with their pockets, don't they? I mean,
Yeah.
I
And
think
I think,
I think I'll be voting with my pockets, to be honest.
yeah, I
Um,
mean, I think that people, and I said it before on the podcast about kind of stabilitarians, people who are kind of trucking along. They probably already have a house. They're not impacted by the big issues of the day in any dramatic way. I mean, they're irritated by cost of petrol and cost of living or whatever, but there's a huge amount of people who, their life is going on regardless. There's obviously a lot of people who are really suffering with cost of living and other things as well. But I think that a lot of those people will just end up voting Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. But I think if there's an issue, events between now and then may very well arise that change the whole conversation that the election is based around into something completely different. And I think, as I said already, that could very easily be law and order, but it could be something else. And they may vote a completely different way. But I think the government and to be fair to Simon Harris, um, in the short period before those local and European elections happened, he did manage to turn the fortunes of Fine Gael around quite substantially. I think he definitely pulled back a substantial chunk of Fine Gael voters that have left them, and he ate Sinn Féin's lunch basically. So I would say that if he's smart, he'll be doing everything he possibly can to get immigration out of the public's mind in advance of a general election and turn their focus onto something where he can win.
the other thing is, there's a lot of money floating around in the country.
Mm.
I was talking to somebody in a Mercedes dealership a couple of weeks ago, about 10 days ago, actually. And I was making the small talk and I was saying, like, what's business like? He said Newmarks are flying out the door. I mean, Newmarks are flying out the door. That tells me there's a lot of people with a lot of disposable cash around the place. And there's undoubtedly a lot of people with a lot of disposable cash around the place. But then, as I've said to you before, there's also kind of a lower middle class in society who I think are really feeling the pinch. People with 3 or 4 kids working 2 public sector jobs. On paper, they're quite wealthy, but in reality, they're struggling to make the end of every month. And I think those voters are really the dog that hasn't barked yet.
But that's the thing. I mean, and I think that uh, as voters, Ireland is maybe moving a bit away from being from left and right and more into a kind of a social split in how people vote or who people vote for.
Well, that's the pattern sort of right across the UK. I wasn't right across the UK. I would have been shot. Darby falling out with Ireland and then saying right across the UK, I would have been shot if I'd accidentally said that. So I meant to say right across the Western world. That's the
Mm.
pattern, right? It is, and it's this kind of political realignment where the sort of in the US the great dividing line is college education.
Yeah,
A person with a college education is something like 6 times more likely to vote for a Democrat than somebody who doesn't have a college education. And of course, in the US, college isn't free. You've got to pay a load of money to go to it. Um, and it's the same here. Like, we obviously have one of the reasons Europe is more left wing is because we've got more college graduates with these attitudes than the Americans do. But it's the same thing if you look at the UK. I mean, where's Nigel Farage the strongest? It's not, and one of the reasons why he won't take a load of seats, even if he wins 20% of the vote, is that his vote isn't actually where the Tory seats are. He'll get
yeah,
some votes in the south of England, but actually, what Reform will end up doing is getting a load of votes and coming second to Labour in a whole swathe of working class northern seats in England, which is why their vote won't translate into seats for them and why they'll be lucky to come away with 5 or 6, even if they win 20% of the vote. But it's that realignment where the working classes are shifting populist right, and the richer you are, the more left wing and liberal you're becoming,
mm,
which is the kind of ongoing thing that's happening right across the world. And I think it's because we live in a society that is basically geared towards people with college degrees. Like we invent jobs for these people, literally invent jobs for these people, which is why we have so many NGOs.
yeah. I mean, but from a political strategy point of view, if you're Simon Harris, you know that, provided you keep things ticking along for the people in Blackrock, you don't have to worry as much about the people in Ballymun, and you weren't going to win a seat there anyway.
Yeah. I keep coming back to it. People in Stillorgan in the local elections get Fine Gael over 50% of the vote.
Yeah,
It's absolutely
and
for me.
their turnout is higher.
Yeah.
So, they're I can't remember what the exact figures are, but like certainly in local elections, the turnout tended to be low, very low 30s in, very working class areas, and, up high 40s, 50s in more wealthier areas. So,
Mhm.
as long as you keep them sweet, you're kind of winning. Fine Gael aren't going to win a seat in Ballymun, so they might as well leave it to Sinn Féin to fight over with independents.
Yeah, exactly. That is the situation. Um, Anyway, I think we've talked enough for one week. I am not going to. If you're looking to have rows with me on Gript .ie next week, you won't find me there. I'm going to go away and drink some little drinks with umbrellas in them. Because I know this sounds very self-indulgent, but I actually need a holiday. So I'm going to be away next week, and then I'll be back a couple of days the week after, and then away again for another few days for a wedding.
Well for you.
Says she who'll be away for about a month in August, I imagine. But yeah, it is well for me. I'm looking forward
That's
to it.
ages away.
It's ages away. I know. Sneaks up on you though.
I know
Um,
actually it does. Keith said to me earlier on, he said it's only 6 weeks away. I feel like when you're involved with an election, particularly an election that's kind of at the beginning of June, everything, you just race up to it and you don't think about anything after it, if you know what I mean. So all of a sudden you're kind of we're nearly at the end of June and it's the summer and kids are getting their summer holidays tomorrow week.
yeah. And
Um,
are you totally wrapped up now with the whole business of the campaign? All the posters are down, I take it, or am I talking about a sore subject?
well, I hope the posters are down. Sometimes posters magically reappear, you know yourself.
They do. They do magically reappear, and it always seems to be people who sort of candidates on the left don't like. Their posters tend to magically reappear.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah, it's funny,
we
isn't
won't name any parties at all, but
it?
it is remarkable how often posters just tend to magically reappear a couple of weeks after the elections. Keep your eye out for that.
Yeah, so there's um no, I as far as I know, there was a few stragglers that got them. But as far as I know, the posters are down, and yeah, like that's paperwork and stuff to submit. But now it's pretty much done. It's a strange feeling because it's all consuming for so long, and then one day, like Niall sent me a message today saying that yesterday was the first day that we didn't speak yesterday on the phone, and he said I think it's the first day in about 67 days in a row that we didn't speak or some crazy length of time, and he was like, "Did you miss me?" And I was like, "Not really, kind of."
I was reading his tweets this week. I reading all this week, and I think you might have a job on your hands.
No.
I think you might have another job in your hands. I think he's sounding to me like a man who has caught the bug. But that is only me speculating. I have no insight.
But he's always been like that. He's always been, I mean, he's not, people will say, oh, like he's got a lot of opinions, but he's always been like that. He's never hid his views. So, um, maybe you're paying more attention to them. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what he's going to do. I said on the podcast before that I thought maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. But he said he did an interview with The Independent this week and he said he wasn't running again.
Okay.
And he wasn't a member of Independent Ireland anymore.
Oh. Well, I suppose, if you go back on the radio, you have to give up all political affiliations anyway. So that is fair enough. Those are the rules. We all play by them and would expect him to as well. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for listening, as always. Sorry to those of you who are waiting with bated eyes to see our wonderful visages, but that will happen in due course once Noble, who's our tech and audio guy, has given me my instructions on how to make it work in the most efficient way. That will happen, and we look forward to seeing you literally when that does. But until then, and until next week, when I'll be talking to you from somewhere warm and sunny, and I'll be in a much better mood as a result. From Sarah, it's goodbye, and from me, it's goodbye. And that was another edition of The Week That Really Was.